The emergency session had been going for 12 hours straight, and nobody cared anymore about proper procedures. Delegates screamed across the circular chamber while Lyra pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to focus through the chaos. Someone threw a data pad. It clattered against the wall. "Order! I demand order!" Chancellor Drevak's voice boomed through the speakers, but nobody listened. The Kryn delegate had stopped trying to maintain any pretense of civility 3 hours ago. Lyra watched Daniel Cross gather his papers with methodical precision. The human ambassador moved slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the universe. Maybe he did. His people were leaving after all. "Ambassador Cross, surely we can discuss this further," Lyra said quietly, moving to his side while the others continued their shouting match. Daniel looked at her with tired eyes. Eyes that had witnessed 2 centuries of galactic politics compressed into one human lifetime through the magic of their medical technology. "There's nothing left to discuss, Lyra. The vote was 847 to 1. You can't just abandon us." "We're not abandoning anyone. We're respecting your democratic decision." He sealed his briefcase with a soft click. "You voted. This is what you wanted." "That's not fair and you know it," Lyra hissed, keeping her voice low. "The vote was about the War Crimes Tribunal expansion, not about humanity leaving the Council." Daniel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The tribunal was the last straw, not the first. How many times this year alone have we proposed peace enforcement measures? How many times have they been rejected? 17, Lyra. 17 separate initiatives to prevent conflicts before they start, all rejected. Across the chamber, Premier Voss of the Halon Confederacy was nose to nose with Chancellor Drevak, their argument about border disputes escalating toward threats. Nobody was stopping them. Nobody except humans had ever bothered to stop them. "We need you," Lyra said simply. "No, you don't. You've made that abundantly clear." Daniel picked up his briefcase. "You need someone to blame when your own diplomatic efforts fail. You need someone to do the dirty work of enforcement while you maintain your moral superiority. You need a referee so you can keep playing your games without consequences." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Daniel gestured toward the arguing delegates. "We've been mediating the Kryn-Halon dispute for 40 years. 40 years of ceasefires, negotiations, treaties. And every single time, both sides violate the agreements within months. We enforce the penalties, they hate us for it, and the cycle continues. Well, no more." Lyra felt something cold settle in her stomach. What happens to the treaties? "They stay in effect. We're not enforcing them anymore. That's your job now." Daniel started walking toward the exit. "Good luck with that, by the way." "Daniel, please." He stopped, turned back. For a moment, his expression softened. "Lyra, I like you. You're one of the few delegates who actually tries to build peace instead of just managing conflicts. But even you voted against the tribunal expansion." "My government instructed me to." "I know, that's the problem," Daniel sighed. "Every species in this council wants peace, but nobody wants to pay the price for it. Real peace requires enforcement. It requires holding people accountable. It requires making enemies of those who break the rules. Humanity has been making those enemies for you, taking that hatred, bearing that burden, and you resent us for it." The shouting in the chamber reached a new pitch. Someone mentioned military deployments. Lyra's blood ran cold. "If you leave now, they'll tear each other apart within a month," she said. "I know." Daniel's voice was quiet, sad. "We've run the projections. 73 separate conflicts currently held in check by human diplomatic pressure. Trade disputes, border disagreements, resource competitions, old grudges. Remove us from the equation and they all ignite. Then why leave? Why let billions die?" "Because maybe that's what it takes." Daniel met her eyes. "Maybe the galaxy needs to learn what peace actually costs, what it means to live without someone holding back the darkness. We can't protect you forever, Lyra. You have to grow up eventually. This isn't teaching us a lesson, it's condemning us to death. Then don't die, make different choices, enforce your own treaties, hold your own people accountable, be the civilization you claim to be. Daniel turned away again. Or don't, that's the beauty of freedom, you get to choose. Commander Roth was waiting by the exit, the last human military liaison remaining in council space. She nodded to Lyra with something like respect, then fell into step beside Daniel. The embassy, Roth asked. Packed, the staff left this morning. We're the last ones. Daniel paused at the doorway, looking back at the chaos one final time. You know what's funny? They think we want to leave. They think we're angry, spiteful. Aren't we? Roth said quietly. We're heartbroken. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. We spent 200 years building something beautiful, a galaxy where different species could coexist peacefully, where conflicts got resolved through dialogue instead of violence, where justice meant something, and they voted it away because it was inconvenient. The chamber's main screen flickered to life, breaking news from the frontier. A Kryn patrol had fired on a Halon civilian transport, 30 dead. Voss was screaming for retaliation. Drevek was calling it justified self-defense. Who's going to mediate that? Lyra asked, her voice barely a whisper. You are, Daniel said, all of you together like adults. He walked out. Roth followed. The doors sealed behind them with a finality that echoed through the chamber. Lyra stood alone near the exit, watching her fellow delegates descend further into chaos. She pulled out her communicator and tried to reach the human embassy. No response. She tried Daniel's personal line. Nothing. The Centauri delegation head called her name, demanding she return to their caucus. There were votes to organize, positions to coordinate. Someone had to fill the human vacuum. But Lyra just stood there, watching the great experiment crumble. She thought about Daniel's tired eyes, Roth's sad nod, the weight of 2 centuries pressing down on one species' shoulders. 3 weeks later, the first shots were fired in what would become the Kryn-Halon War. By then, humanity had sealed the borders of Sol system. Every attempt at communication went unanswered. They had warned everyone. Nobody had listened. Now the galaxy would learn what peace actually cost and who had been paying that price all along. The cargo manifest showed basic medical supplies and food rations, but Helene Cross knew better than to trust paperwork in the Outer Rim territories anymore. 6 weeks had passed since her father walked out of the Galactic Council, and the trade routes were falling apart faster than anyone had predicted. Ship approaching on intercept vector, her navigator announced, voice tight with tension. Helene brought up the scanner display. 3 vessels, military configuration, Meridian collective markings. Except Meridian military had no business this far into neutral space, which meant these were either deserters or privateers. Neither option was good. Hail them, she ordered. The response came back immediately. Merchant vessel, cut engines and prepare for inspection. Failure to comply will result in your destruction. Her first officer looked at her with wide eyes. They can't do that. This is neutral trade space, the protection accords. The accords were enforced by human patrol fleets, Helene interrupted quietly. There are no human patrol fleets anymore. She cut the engines. The alternative was death, and she had 40 crew members depending on her to keep them alive. The boarding party was professional about it, at least. They took half her cargo, transferred it to their ships, and left without killing anyone. Small mercies in the new galactic order. Send a distress call to council authorities, Helene said after they jumped away. I already did, Captain, 18 minutes ago. Her communications officer pulled up the response logs. The Council Peacekeeping Force says they'll investigate within the next 14 standard days. 14 days. Before humanity left, response time was measured in hours. Helene started calculating alternate routes back to civilized space, routes that would add weeks to their journey but might avoid the growing pirate zones. The problem was, those zones were expanding daily. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Lyra sat in what remained of the Council mediation chamber and listened to two species argue about mineral rights. The Syndicate representative insisted they had prior claim to the asteroid field. The Collective representative insisted the Syndicate had violated survey protocols. 3 months ago, a human arbitrator would have reviewed the documentation, made a ruling, and that would have been that. Both parties would have grumbled but complied because human rulings were backed by enforcement mechanisms that actually worked. Now Lyra had no enforcement mechanisms. She had words pleas, requests for compromise. Neither side was listening. Perhaps we could divide the field into sectors, she suggested, knowing how weak it sounded. The Syndicate representative laughed, actually laughed. Perhaps you could enforce that division, Ambassador. Oh wait, you can't. The humans are gone and your council has no teeth. He was right and they both knew it. The Collective representative leaned forward. We're taking the field, try to stop us. That's an act of war, Lyra said, but even she could hear the emptiness in the threat. War requires consequences. The Syndicate representative stood up. Where are your consequences, Ambassador? Where are your peacekeeping fleets? Where are your sanctions that actually matter? They both walked out, leaving Lyra alone in the chamber with her useless mediation reports. She pulled up her personal files and started reviewing the data Daniel had mentioned. 73 conflicts held in check by human diplomatic pressure. She'd thought he was exaggerating. Now she was watching them all ignite simultaneously, and the number kept growing. A trade dispute in the Antares sector had escalated to military posturing. Ancient territorial claims between the Rin and the Tholes were being reasserted with violence. Pirate attacks were increasing exponentially because the trade routes had no protection. And everywhere, the pattern was the same. Without enforcement, treaties were just words. Without consequences, laws meant nothing. Lyra received a message from her homeworld. The Synthari Council wanted her to take a stronger stance, to somehow restore order through pure diplomatic skill. They didn't understand that diplomacy without power was just begging. Daniel had understood. That's why he'd left. She tried reaching human space again, using emergency diplomatic channels that should have remained open. Nothing. The humans had truly sealed their borders. Sol's system was surrounded by automated defense platforms that would destroy any ship that approached too close. One species, isolated and alone, while the galaxy they'd protected for 2 centuries tore itself apart. Lyra started tracking casualty reports. 30 dead in that Halon transport Daniel had mentioned. 50 more in a border skirmish between Kryn and Halon forces. 100 in the Collective Syndicate asteroid field dispute that had predictably turned violent. The numbers kept climbing. Admiral Quen of the Meridian Collective sent her a private message. His own government was authorizing military actions that violated 6 different treaties. He'd objected, been overruled. Now he was watching his fleet prepare for operations that would kill thousands, maybe millions. Tell me what to do, his message read. The humans would have stopped this. How do I stop this? Lyra had no answer for him. She pulled up human peace protocols, the frameworks Daniel's people had established over 2 centuries. Complex systems of verification, enforcement, graduated sanctions, military intervention as a last resort. All of it backed by humanity's willingness to be hated, to be the ones who said no, to be the ones who enforced rules nobody else wanted to enforce. Lyra tried to implement one of the protocols for the Collective Syndicate dispute. She sent formal citations, violation notices, proposed sanctions. Both sides ignored her completely. She tried reaching out to other species who'd worked closely with humans. Maybe together they could salvage something. Most didn't respond. Those who did were drowning in their own crisis management. The whole galaxy was on fire, and there weren't enough diplomats to even count the flames. 6 weeks since humanity left. Death toll estimated at 40,000 and rising. 17 shooting wars where there had been zero. Economic damage in the trillions as trade routes collapsed and insurance markets failed. And this was just the beginning. Lyra stood at her office window, looking out at the council spire where delegates used to gather in relative peace. Half the diplomatic missions had closed. Many species had recalled their ambassadors to prepare for war. She thought about Daniel's final words, "Make different choices." The galaxy was making choices, just not the ones he'd hoped for. The evacuation alarm started at 400 station time, and by 4:30 it didn't matter anymore. Governor Thane watched the population counter on his display drop from 4 million to 0 in less than 30 minutes. The biological agent worked fast. Too fast for evacuation. Too fast for medical response. Just fast enough for people to understand they were dying before they actually died. Lyra received the first reports 3 hours later. The Kryn Empire had deployed a prohibited biological weapon against a Halon colony world. 4 million dead. No survivors. Complete violation of every warfare convention in the Galactic Legal Code. She immediately called an emergency council session. Only 40% of delegates bothered to show up. This is a clear violation of the Biological Weapons Convention of 2247, Lyra said, her voice shaking with rage and grief. We must respond immediately with sanctions, tribunal proceedings, and military intervention if necessary. Chancellor Drevak's hologram shimmered in his designated space. The Halon Confederacy has been harboring terrorists in that colony for months. We acted in self-defense. Self-defense, Lyra's hands clenched. You murdered 4 million civilians. Prove it, Drevak said calmly. Prove the weapon came from Kryn sources. Prove it wasn't a Halon accident meant to frame us. Prove it in a court with actual authority to render judgment. And there was the problem. The Biological Weapons Tribunal had been a human initiative. The one the Council had voted down 847 to 1. Without it, there was no mechanism to investigate, no authority to prosecute, no way to enforce consequences. We condemn this action in the strongest possible terms, one of the delegates said weakly. Drevak laughed, actually laughed. Your condemnation is noted and ignored. Next topic. Premier Voss of the Halon Confederacy appeared, his scales flushed dark with fury. There will be retaliation. We will respond in kind. More biological weapons, Lyra asked, horrified. Whatever it takes to achieve justice. Voss's image flickered with interference. Since your council cannot provide it, we'll provide it ourselves. He disconnected. The council session dissolved into chaos. Nobody could agree on what to do. Nobody had the power to enforce anything anyway. The meeting ended after 20 minutes with no actions taken, no consequences assigned, no justice delivered. 4 million dead, and the galactic response was a strongly worded statement of concern. Lyra returned to her office and found a file waiting for her. Anonymous sender, heavily encrypted. She almost deleted it, but something made her decrypt it instead. It was from Commander Roth. You're probably wondering why we really left, the message began. The tribunal vote was the trigger, but not the reason. The reason is what you're experiencing right now. We ran simulations for 50 years, Lyra. Thousands of scenarios, millions of iterations. Every single one ended the same way. Without external enforcement, without consequences that actually matter, civilizations eventually return to violence. It's not inevitable, but it's probable. Very, very probable. The file included data, projection after projection showing how conflicts would escalate after human withdrawal. The accuracy was terrifying. The simulations had predicted the collective syndicate dispute, the Kryn-Halon War, even the approximate timing of the biological weapon deployment. We knew this would happen, Roth's message continued. We knew millions would die. We left anyway. Why? Because we'd become enablers. Every time we stopped a war, we prevented species from learning why wars are terrible. Every time we enforced a treaty, we prevented governments from building their own enforcement mechanisms. Every time we delivered justice, we prevented societies from demanding it themselves. We were creating a galaxy of children, dependent on us to solve every problem, unwilling to grow up and take responsibility. Lyra wanted to throw her datapad across the room. 4 million people just died. But Roth's message wasn't finished. So yes, people will die, many people. More than you can imagine, and we could stop it. We have the fleets, the weapons, the diplomatic weight. We could return tomorrow and restore order in a month. But then what? We maintain the peace for another century, another 2 centuries. How long until you actually learn the lesson? How long until the galaxy grows up? The file included one more thing. A list of names, species, individuals, organizations that had fought against the biological weapons during the convention debates. People who'd understood the danger, who tried to prevent this exact scenario. These are the ones worth saving, Roth's message concluded. When it gets bad enough, we'll evacuate them. The rest of you will learn or you won't. Either way, it's not our problem anymore. Lyra looked at the list. Her own name was on it. So was Admiral Quinn. And Helene Cross, Daniel's daughter, still running her merchant routes through increasingly dangerous space. 3 months since humanity left. Death toll just jumped to 4,040,000. And according to Roth's projections, this was barely the beginning. Lyra tried one more time to reach Daniel directly. She sent a message through every diplomatic channel she could access, using emergency codes that should have bypassed standard filters. We were wrong, I was wrong, come back please. The response came back within minutes, not from Daniel, from an automated system. Your message has been received. Humanity will not return. You have chosen your path, walk it. That night, the Halon Confederacy launched its retaliation. Not biological weapons, but something worse. They'd been developing antimatter warheads, another prohibited weapon system that human inspectors had eliminated decades ago. The Kryn border fortress housed 15,000 military personnel. The antimatter warhead left nothing but expanding radiation clouds. 15,000 more dead. The spiral was accelerating. Lyra pulled up casualty projections based on current escalation rates. The numbers were incomprehensible. Hundreds of millions in the first year, billions if the conflict spread further. She started making a list of her own. Species that might still listen to reason. Governments that hadn't fully committed to violence. Individuals with enough influence to maybe, possibly, slow this catastrophe. The list was depressingly short. Admiral Quinn sent another message. My government just authorized military operations against neutral shipping. I've been ordered to attack merchant vessels suspected of carrying contraband to Kryn territories. Suspected, not confirmed, just suspected. I have families on those ships, Lyra. What do I do? Lyra stared at the message for a long time before responding. Whatever lets you sleep at night. It was the most honest answer she could give, because the truth was she didn't know anymore. The rules were gone, the referees had left, and the game was turning into a bloodbath. Dust still hung in the air from the explosion that had torn through the council chambers 3 days ago. Lyra walked through the wreckage alone, her footsteps echoing in what had once been the heart of galactic civilization. The terrorist group claimed responsibility within hours. Some radical faction nobody had heard of before, angry about treaty violations nobody was enforcing anyway. They'd killed 17 delegates and injured 50 more. The symbolic heart of galactic government, reduced to rubble and bodies. 8 months since humanity left. Death toll was somewhere around 40 billion now. Nobody could count accurately anymore. Entire planets had gone dark. Communication networks were failing. The careful infrastructure that had supported galactic civilization was collapsing piece by piece. Lyra's communicator buzzed. Another message from her homeworld. The Centauri government wanted her to return home immediately. Their sector was preparing for full militarization. Everyone was choosing sides now, forming alliances based on old friendships and older grudges. She ignored the message and kept walking through the ruins. The diplomatic vault had survived the explosion. Lyra accessed it using emergency credentials that probably shouldn't work anymore but somehow still did. Inside were centuries of records, treaties, accords, conventions. All the careful diplomatic work that humans had helped build, now just words on displays nobody read. She found the file she was looking for. Human Peace Protocols, Comprehensive Edition. 2,000 pages of frameworks, procedures, enforcement mechanisms. The instruction manual for maintaining galactic civilization. Lyra had tried implementing these protocols. So had a few other diplomats who still cared. But implementing required power, and power required consensus, and consensus required trust. Nobody trusted anyone anymore. Her communicator buzzed again. This time it was Admiral Quinn. "I did it," his message said simply. "I led the coup. My government was ordering massacres, so I removed them from power." Lyra felt her heart sink. Quinn was one of the good ones. Principled, honest, genuinely committed to peace, and even he had resorted to violence. "Now what?" she asked when she called him back. "Now I try to stop my own military from committing more atrocities." Quinn looked exhausted on the video feed. "Half my fleet supports me. The other half wants me arrested for treason. We're fighting each other while external threats are massing on our borders." "What external threats?" "All of them." Quinn pulled up tactical displays. "The Kryn Empire is forming a grand alliance. 6 major powers, 30 minor ones. They're calling it a defensive coalition, but the deployment patterns suggest offensive operations." Lyra studied the displays. The coalition was massive. If they coordinated their military actions, neutral space would be crushed within months. Peaceful species would be conquered or destroyed. "We need help," Quinn said quietly. "We need the humans back." "They're not coming back. I've tried everything." "Try again. Try harder." Quinn's expression hardened. "Because if you can't get them to help, I'm looking at fleet deployments that suggest the extinction of multiple species. Not conquest. Extinction. The Kryn Coalition isn't planning to occupy neutral territories. They're planning to eliminate the populations and colonize the empty worlds." Lyra felt sick. That's genocide on a scale. "On a scale the galaxy hasn't seen since humanity unified Earth," Quinn finished. "Yes, exactly, which is why they're the only ones who might stop it." After the call ended, Lyra spent 6 hours composing a message to Earth. Not a diplomatic plea, not a request for intervention, just the truth. "This is what the galaxy looks like without you. 40 billion dead and counting, multiple genocides in progress, technological civilization collapsing. We voted you out because we thought we could handle our own problems. We were wrong. We were arrogant. We were children playing at being adults, and now billions are paying for our mistakes." She included casualty reports, tactical analyses, projections showing the extinction timeline for neutral species. Everything that might make the humans understand the magnitude of the catastrophe. "I'm not asking you to save us. I know you won't. I'm just asking you to witness what we've become. Watch your galaxy burn. Watch everything you built turn to ash, and know that you could have stopped it." The response came back 72 hours later, not from Daniel or Roth, from someone Lyra had never heard of, speaking with the authority of Earth's unified government. "We are watching. We've been watching the entire time. Every battle, every massacre, every choice your species make. We're documenting everything for future study. When this is over, assuming galactic civilization survives, the records will be available. Perhaps future generations will learn from your failures. That's it, Lyra transmitted back. You're just going to watch, document our extinction like we're some scientific experiment. Not your extinction, your education, though we acknowledge the price is horrific. The response was clinical, detached. You asked us to leave. We left. You demanded independence. This is what independence looks like. Freedom to make choices includes freedom to make terrible choices. People are dying. People die in wars. That's why wars should be prevented. That's what we tried to teach you for 2 centuries. The human representative paused. We will evacuate those who fought against this. The peacekeepers, the genuine diplomats, the individuals who tried to prevent catastrophe. We have ships standing by for extraction operations. Everyone else will face the consequences of their choices. Lyra wanted to scream. How can you be so cold? We're not cold, we're heartbroken, but we learned a hard lesson in our own history. Some wounds have to heal themselves. Some lessons can only be learned through pain. We can't protect you from yourselves forever. The transmission ended. Lyra stood alone in the ruined council chambers, surrounded by the wreckage of galactic civilization, watching long-range sensors track the Kryn Coalition's final preparations. The attack would begin within weeks. Neutral space would fall within months. The death toll would reach hundreds of billions. And humanity would watch, document, and let it happen. She pulled up the list of names Roth had sent her. People worth saving. The list had grown longer now, filled with individuals who tried to stop the madness, but it was still tiny compared to the populations facing extinction. Her communicator buzzed one final time. It was Helene Cross, Daniel's daughter, transmitting from deep in neutral space. I'm organizing refugee convoys, trying to evacuate civilians before the Kryn Coalition arrives. Could use help if anyone's still interested in saving lives instead of scoring political points. Lyra looked at the message for a long moment, then made her choice. She couldn't save the galaxy, but maybe she could save some of the people in it. The orbital defense grid flickered and died at 1600 hours, and Lyra knew her homeworld had maybe 6 hours left before the invasion fleets landed. She stood in the evacuation command center, routing civilian transports to the last functioning spaceport, while Kryn warships systematically destroyed everything in orbit. 11 months since humanity left. The death toll had stopped being a number and become a concept. Hundreds of billions, multiple species extinct, entire sectors of space now empty except for debris and radiation. Transport 7 reports engine failure, her communications officer announced. 2,000 refugees stranded at Port Delta. Reroute Transport 9 to pick them up, Lyra ordered, knowing it meant abandoning 4,000 others at Port Gamma. The mathematics of triage, deciding who lived and who died based on logistics and luck. Her personal communicator lit up with an incoming transmission. Earth codes. She nearly dropped it in surprise. This is Evacuation Fleet Perseverance, a human voice said. Professional calm, like they weren't arriving in the middle of an apocalypse. We're here for Ambassador Lyra and designated personnel, transmitting extraction coordinates now. Lyra pulled up the data. 3 human warships, small by military standards but more powerful than anything in the current battle. They'd punch through the Kryn blockade like it wasn't even there. We have 50,000 refugees in the evacuation queue, Lyra transmitted back. How many can you take? There was a pause. Our orders are to extract you and 47 other designated individuals. Maximum capacity for emergency evacuation is 5,000 if we strip non-essential equipment. 50,000 people, 5,000 spaces, another impossible choice. Give me the criteria, Lyra said quietly. Peacekeepers, diplomats, medical personnel, anyone who actively worked to prevent the conflicts. We have names, records, documentation. The human officer transmitted the files. These are the people who tried to save the galaxy. We're returning the favor. Lyra looked at the list. Admiral Quinn was on it. Helene Cross. Dozens of others she'd worked with over the months since humanity left. Good people who'd fought against the tide and lost anyway. She thought about the 45,000 refugees who wouldn't make the cut. Families, children, people whose only crime was being born in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I need more ships," she said. "We have more ships, stationed across the galaxy, running similar extractions. But we can't save everyone, Ambassador. We're rescuing those who have the knowledge and experience to maybe, possibly, help rebuild civilization when this is over. And the rest just die." "Yes," the human officer's voice carried genuine sorrow. "They die, just like billions have already died, just like billions more will die before this ends. We can't save the galaxy. We can only save the pieces that might learn from this catastrophe." Lyra made the hardest decision of her life. She authorized the extraction list, condemning 45,000 people to probable death so 5,000 might survive. The human ships arrived at the coordinates exactly on schedule. Military precision, no wasted movement. The boarding process was efficient and impersonal. People were scanned, verified against the list, directed to assigned quarters. Lyra was the last to board. She stood at the airlock, looking back at her homeworld one final time. The first invasion forces were entering the atmosphere. By morning, Centaur would be a conquered world, her people enslaved or dead. "Ambassador, we need to leave now," the human officer said gently. She stepped through the airlock. The doors sealed behind her with finality. The ship broke orbit as Kryn invasion forces landed below. Lyra watched on the displays as her homeworld burned. The human ships didn't intervene, didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge the atrocity happening below them. They'd come for specific people, and now they were leaving. Everything else was someone else's problem. Admiral Quinn was already aboard, along with his senior staff. They'd abandoned their fleet mid-battle, extracted by human ships while their subordinates fought and died against overwhelming odds. "This feels wrong," Quinn said quietly as they watched Centaur fall. "It is wrong," Lyra agreed. "But it's the choice we made when we voted them out of the council." Helene Cross found them in the observation deck. She looked different from her father, but carried the same weight in her eyes. The weight of witnessing civilizational collapse and being powerless to stop it. "Welcome to Sol System," she said, gesturing at the displays. "Refugee population currently stands at 5 million, representatives from 40 species, the ones who tried to stop the madness." 5 million out of hundreds of billions, Lyra said. "Yes," Helene didn't sugarcoat it. 5 million survivors from a galaxy that chose violence over peace. My father is organizing orientation programs, teaching refugee populations about human history, human approaches to conflict resolution, human understanding of why peace requires constant work. "Educational programs while the galaxy burns," Quinn said bitterly. "Educational programs so the next generation doesn't make the same mistakes," Helene corrected. "This galaxy is lost, but maybe the one that emerges from the ashes won't be." They arrived at Earth a week later. Lyra had studied human history during her diplomatic training, but seeing the homeworld in person was different. One planet, 8 billion people, completely unified after spending most of their existence killing each other. They'd learned their lessons through blood and fire, multiple world wars, genocides, near-extinction events. Then finally, slowly, painfully, they'd built a civilization based on enforced peace and mutual accountability. Now they were offering that knowledge to refugees from a galaxy that had rejected it. Daniel Cross met Lyra at the landing facility. He looked older than she remembered, more tired. Watching the galaxy destroy itself had taken its toll. "I'm sorry," Lyra said simply. "I know." Daniel's expression was unreadable. "Come on, we have a lot of work to do." The orientation program was comprehensive. Human history from ancient conflicts to global unification. The frameworks they'd developed for preventing war. The enforcement mechanisms that made peace possible. The price they'd paid to learn these lessons. 5 million refugees attended the sessions, learning, understanding, finally grasping what humanity had been trying to teach the galaxy for 2 centuries. Outside the Sol system, the wars continued. The Kryn coalition conquered neutral space. Other alliances formed and collapsed. Species went extinct. Planets burned. The death toll climbed past 200 billion. And humanity watched, documented, and taught the survivors why it had happened and how to prevent it from happening again. The classroom held 30 students from 12 different species, and Lyra could still remember when some of their homeworlds existed. Now those worlds were either conquered, destroyed, or abandoned. These children were the future, whether anyone liked it or not. "Who can tell me why the Kryn-Halon War started?" Lyra asked. A young Centauri raised her hand, "Because nobody stopped it." "Deeper than that," Lyra encouraged. A human student spoke up. "Because both sides believed they could win without consequences. They'd seen treaties broken before without real punishment. They thought this time would be the same." Exactly. Lyra pulled up historical records. For 40 years, humanity mediated their border disputes. 40 years of ceasefires that both sides violated, knowing humans would intervene before things escalated too far. We became enablers. We prevented them from learning that actions have consequences. 5 years since humanity withdrew. The galaxy outside Sol system was unrecognizable. The death toll had stabilized around 400 billion, not because the killing stopped, but because there weren't that many people left to kill in the active war zones. Some species had achieved peace through mutual exhaustion. Others had been conquered and integrated into larger empires. A few had gone extinct entirely. The galactic population was perhaps 40% of what it had been before humanity left. Admiral Quen taught military history in the next classroom over. Captain Helene Cross ran logistics training for students interested in humanitarian operations. The refugee population had grown to 7 million as human ships continued rescue operations in salvageable situations. But 7 million out of hundreds of billions. The mathematics of catastrophe. After class, Lyra walked to the memorial wall. Names carved in stone, representing the species that no longer existed. The Tholes, the Rin, 17 others that had been completely eliminated in the wars. Daniel Cross found her there, like he often did. "Still carrying the weight?" he asked gently. "Someone has to." Lyra traced the carved names with her fingers. "These species died because we were too proud to accept help, too arrogant to enforce our own rules, too comfortable letting someone else do the hard work of maintaining peace. And now you're teaching the next generation not to make the same mistakes." If there is a next generation. Lyra pulled up the latest reports from the galaxy. The Kryn Empire controls 40% of civilized space now. They're consolidating power, rebuilding infrastructure. Some analysts think they'll attempt an assault on Sol system within a decade. Daniel smiled grimly. "Let them try. They'll learn the same lesson everyone else learned. Humanity doesn't lose defensive wars." "You'd kill billions to prove a point." "We'd kill billions to protect our own. There's a difference." Daniel's expression hardened. "We left the galaxy to its own choices. We didn't abandon our responsibility to protect humanity and those under our protection. Anyone who threatens Sol system will face the full weight of human military power. No warnings, no negotiations, just total war." Lyra had seen the defensive installations surrounding Sol system, enough firepower to sterilize entire fleets. Humanity had spent 5 years building fortifications while the galaxy tore itself apart. "We could still help them," she said quietly. "We are helping. We're helping the ones worth saving, the ones who learned the lesson." Daniel gestured toward the refugee settlements. "We're teaching them, supporting them, giving them the tools to maybe, possibly, rebuild something better when the current chaos burns itself out. And if it doesn't burn out, if the wars continue for another century, then the galaxy will be full of empty planets for refugees to resettle. Either way, life continues, just not for everyone." That night, Lyra attended a session led by human historians. They were teaching galactic history from a human perspective, showing patterns the other species had missed. "Every galactic civilization follows similar patterns," the lecturer explained. "Initial expansion, contact with other species, competition for resources. Either they develop mutual cooperation mechanisms or they destroy each other. You were on the cooperation path for 2 centuries, but only because humanity enforced it. Remove the enforcement and you reverted to your base competitive instincts." A young Halon student raised her hand. "So we were always doomed to this." "Not doomed, predisposed. Humanity went through the same patterns. We had our world wars, our genocides, our near-extinction events. We learned through catastrophic loss that cooperation beats competition for long-term survival. You're learning the same lesson now. It's just costing you more because the scale is larger." Lyra thought about that later, walking through the refugee settlements. 7 million people from 40 species, all learning to coexist under human guidance, building new communities, mixing cultures, forming bonds across species lines. It was what the Galactic Council should have been. What it could have been if they'd actually enforced their own ideals instead of just talking about them. She received a message from an old colleague still alive in neutral space. The wars were finally winding down in some sectors, not from peace agreements but from simple exhaustion. Too many dead, too many resources destroyed, too much damage to continue fighting. Some species were beginning reconstruction, tentative alliances forming, local peacekeeping forces establishing order in limited areas. The galaxy was learning, slowly, painfully, at the cost of hundreds of billions of lives. Lyra sent a message back. "If you want guidance on reconstruction, we have protocols available, human peace frameworks, enforcement mechanisms, everything we tried to give you before. The only difference now is you'll have to implement them yourselves. We're not coming back." A week later, delegations from 3 recovering species arrived at Sol System's border. They weren't asking for human intervention. They were asking for the education programs. They wanted to send their people to learn what the refugees were learning. Daniel authorized limited educational exchanges. Small groups, carefully vetted, learning human approaches to conflict resolution, and then returning home to implement them. It wasn't salvation. It wasn't even recovery. It was just the first small step toward maybe, possibly, building something better from the ruins. Lyra stood in her classroom, looking at the next generation of students. Children who would grow up understanding the true cost of peace and the responsibility required to maintain it. "The galaxy made a choice," she told them. "They chose pride over wisdom, independence over guidance, the right to make their own mistakes over the safety of external enforcement. 400 billion people paid for that choice with their lives. You're here because your parents or guardians understood the cost before it was too late. Never forget that. Never forget what the galaxy looked like when humans walked away. And never, ever take peace for granted again." The students listened in silence. They understood. They'd lived through the consequences. The question was whether understanding would be enough when their generation inherited what remained of galactic civilization. Only time would tell.